Well, hello. Come
Hi.
on in. More than anything else, the Pathfinder Award, it was a Lifetime Achievement Award. And so when I looked over the people who received it, I'm not at that stage, sort of like at the end of my career. So I was shocked when I was called about it. But the person who nominated me and the committee said that because of the work that I do, and because of the way that I have engaged in scholarship beyond just journal publishing, that has been incredibly impactful for the field. So that meant a lot. I'm not a person who ever thought they would ever get this type of award or any type of award like this. So this is sort of like a surreal experience because I still can't believe it. But I would say that some of the most meaningful contributions, at least in my mind, has been sort of the introduction of intersectionality into the field as a theoretical standpoint, and also a theoretical idea, and helping to usher that in with colleagues, as well as some of the work that I've done looking at LGBTQ plus practitioners, which no one had ever studied before or looked at before, until a colleague of mine and I published an article about that, and then did a book about it as well. And then I would also say too, the fandom work that I've done, again, nobody really thought about fandom. Fandom has sort of been a thing that we study about Hollywood, those types of disciplines, and it's like, well, fans are just as important of a public as anything else, so why shouldn't we study them? And so bringing that in and bringing in ideas from participatory culture. So I would say those are probably the three things that I think are pretty important and valuable to the field. I did not want to study anything related to race, gender, ethnicity. I didn't want to study that. My initial thing was I wanted to study another area, another discipline. It just didn't it just didn't shake out that way. I've come back to that area, but it's not something I actually wanted to do. But when I started thinking about what I wanted to do for my dissertation work, I really wanted to look at the experiences of professionals and how they engage with power. Because another thing with intersectionality is that it's not just about identity, but it's about how people experience power and how they are subsumed by power, or how they obtain power, how they hold power in the different identities that we have, right? So how do people who are from certain marginalized backgrounds get power and attain power in organizations? That was what I initially wanted. That's what I initially did not want to study this, but I ended up studying that. And that's how I came to intersectionality. I think now what we're seeing is more and more people are using the term intersectionality without really addressing the power dynamics involved in it. And we talk about, we want to have people we're using all these concepts around intersectionality without actually looking at the power issues also embedded in there. And I think that's one of the things that I'm starting to see now, is that people are sort of stripping the term and pulling away from the critical aspect, which is the interrogation of power. And so why do certain identities have more power? How are certain marginalized identities dealing without that power? What are their sources of strength? What are their what type of social and cultural capital are they bringing to bear to deal with issues of not having power, of not being able to be in power? So I think that's one of the bigger issues I'm seeing, but also just people are throwing out things that make them sound like they're doing intersectional campaigns, but they're actually not. They're just we're just going to look at a bunch of these different demographics. Well, what about the power dynamics of it? So what does this mean if you're talking about we want to sell more Slurpees, or we want to sell more X to people? Certain people don't have the financial fortitude or the financial ability to do that. So what does that mean for your campaign? What are you actually trying to do? So that interrogation of power at multiple levels across campaigns, but also within our organizations is something that I'm interested in. I just don't see a lot of people necessarily looking at that through that particular lens. That's a very interesting question. I did a fellowship at, was it a MAPE? Not a MAPE, I forget what it was, AEF professor fellowship at an advertising agency years ago. And I remember talking about the concept of intersectionality to a bunch of students, and they just looked at me like, I don't get it. And I was like, it hadn't yet been mainstreamed, I think, into the culture. But I think more than anything else, it's important for us to think about that everybody just does not have one identity. We have multiple salient identities that come into play at different points in our lives and in our experiences. So we have to think about, how do these intersections collide to create advantages and disadvantages for certain types of people? And so that's important when we're developing any type of message, whether it's a health message, a political message, whether it's an advertising message, whether it's a public relations message. If it's a strategic, intentional message, we have to think about the prior experiences that a person brings to bear, their identities and what they bring to bear, and then also how are they engaging in this moment with this organization, this brand, or this cause, this entity we're dealing with. I think one of the greatest challenges the field is dealing with is the issues of retention. And that's especially within public relations, because I'm looking at the data set now and talking with some other people. It's basically echoing the same things that we saw 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where there's a leakage issue, where people are leaving organizations by the time they get to the mid-ranks. Why is that? So I do think that is a huge issue. And a lot of these issues are not about individual people. It's structural issues. These are structural things that need to be fixed. So what is it about your structure, your culture, your stated beliefs, the unstated beliefs, the unknown knowns, the hidden syllabus, the hidden curriculum that's there in your organization that makes people feel that they can't be there? What are the microaggressions that people are facing that cause them to want to opt out of being in your organization or being in the field in general? So I do think that's a thing to consider. I do think the issues of the backlash for diversity, equity, inclusion work, or community and belonging, however you want to phrase it, ESG, anything that's seen as woke, which I hate that term because this was co-opted out of slang, but that's a whole different discussion. But the woke, quote unquote, thing, that backlash is now coming, and organizations are terrified of being sued, whether it's on ESG and not being able to realize the gains, or investors saying that ESG is not working, or with DEI, terrified that somebody's going to come and say your DEI program is actually racist or reverse racism or something like that. I think a lot of that is going to have negative effects on corporate reputation, as well as corporate trust in corporations. Because if you've made these promises and then you didn't keep them, why should I trust anything else you have to say? So I think as communicators, whether you're on the our side or the PR side, we should all be concerned about people breaking promises or withdrawing promises and what that's eventually going to mean to a brand. So those are some things off the top of my head. So one of my big research areas now, or one of the big things I'm talking about now, is public interest communication, which is where we're dealing with communication for social good, for social change, pro-social communication, thinking about wicked problems, thinking about the systems that create the wicked problems and how communication can solve and fill in some gaps with those wicked problems. So say, for example, people who are unhoused, or environmental, fast fashion, other environmental concerns. How do we address these issues and work together across multiple groups to achieve the ends of stopping or ending some of these things? I think that a lot of students who are wanting to work in advertising and public relations often feel discouraged that they can't work on the issues that concern them. So they don't see, I see that this class I'm doing wants to work with Coke, or they want to work with Lowe's, or whatever this giant corporation, Fortune 100 corporation is, and they feel like, I don't necessarily want to do that. There is room at the table for you to work on the side of nonprofits, also even some corporations who are doing really monumental things in public interest communication. And that is a route to take, and that's a route that's open to you. And I would encourage anybody to look into that. I would also think too is that you can make change at any level just by starting to question things like, why do we do this? Why is this necessary? Why do we think that this is the best way to do it? And also too, for students, more so than anything else, I was just going to be honest, learn entrepreneurial skills, because some organizations you may come to realize that you don't want to work there, or you don't like working here. So understanding how to run a business for yourself, or how to run a workers co-op, or working in a collective, looking at alternative business models, understanding how communication orgs make and earn money, and then figuring out what might be the best way for you forward, which might be entrepreneurship, which might be going out on your own and doing some different things. That's absolutely a way to go, something to do.